And we can use the exact same strategy for positioning the shadow. This was built on the same geometry that the tentacle was built on. You'll see it's casting a shadow straight out. This was used to hold out the tentacle as a matte object. So we can use all these exact transforms. Let's just clone this. I'm holding down Alt and Alt K. There we go. To transform that the same exact amount. And I can use the same match move. Copy, Control C, Control V to paste that. So now I have the shadow. And what we need to do is modify the plate with the shadow. So I'm going to drop down a grade node here. And we'll attach that to this, and we'll use this as a mask. Okay, so let's clear out the bin here so we see what we're doing. Okay, grade 10 is what we want to work on. And we basically need to create a shadow that darkens her face the right amount for how much this little thing would cast a shadow. And there's not a lot of reference in the plate. Usually the best bet is to go around and look at cues to see what would be the appropriate amount of shadow. I mean, the closest thing we have here is maybe when she puts her hand close to her face, we can see about how much shadow her hand throws on her face. So this little tentacle will need to probably do about the same amount when it's close. When it's far away, probably not so much. So let's just start here when it's really close to her face and use that as reference. And darkening means we want to multiply, right? So we'll just do a multiplication. So right now we're getting the alpha channel out of this as our mask, and you'll see it's the shape of the head that was used as the holdout. So let's use the red channel. And there you go. It's very subtle, but it is darkening it because it's not super dense because it was a very soft shadow. If we look at the matte, already had an area light effect built into it. So if you find that a matte isn't dense enough for whatever reason, for your taste, you can always modify it. So let's go ahead and right here where it's right at the base, I'm color probing this. You can see the red channel never really gets super dark. If you wanted to, you could grade this and just make sure you don't push it over white. Grade this to where it starts to be closer to 1. And this will just give you a little bit more control of it when you use it as a matte, as a mask, I should say. So there we go. Now it's super dense, but we have full control of it. Here, we can use it how we want down here. I think this is a little too sharp, really, for any shadow that we're getting. So let's just go ahead and throw an overall 2D blur on it. And I'll just drop that here. And I don't need to blur all the channels. I only really need to blur the RGB. And I really only need to blur the red, but we'll just leave it there. And I'll blur it out just a bit to get something that feels about the same character as the shadows that we saw when she put her hand over her face. Now the other thing we're seeing is that these shadows feel much too gray. They don't have any color in them. So, and they maybe don't feel fat enough either. So let's try to figure out a way where we can kind of make them feel a little bit more, a little bit bigger, and get some of this gray feeling out of them so that they feel a little bit more like they're in that warm room. And it's really not that hard. All we got to do in this grade node is, instead of just multiplying it in this grade node here, rather than just multiplying it by a solid color, black, we can multiply it by something that's a color in the scene. So let's take the color of the shadow of her skin here as inspiration for what we're going to make these shadows. I'm going to color pick that. I'm holding down Control or Shift as I drag, Control and Shift as I drag, and now I'm picking the color of her skin sort of as the color inspiration for my shadow. I'm not going to necessarily, it's not going to be the actual color I use, but I'm getting the hue from that. So that's probably a little too saturated now, but at least I got the hue by color picking. So I can start taking some of the saturation out but not all of it. And that will give me something that hopefully feels a little bit more like the shadows in the scene. And this is a pretty rough way of handling this, but you got to work with what you got. There we go. So now its shadows feel a little bit more like they belong. We'll see how this one works. This shadow going over her hand, it looks a little unnatural now, but once the tentacle is in there, it may come together. It might feel a little bit more appropriate. And the shadows, I think I might be pushing a little too hard on the shadows. Let's put the tentacle in and see how it looks, though. Because once you see that other little thing moving around, all of a sudden it starts to feel a little bit better. So this still feels gray to me. So let's go in here and we'll put some of that saturation back in that I took away. There we go. So I'm going to call that done for now. We're going to move on to some of the next stuff to pull this together.